everybody. Welcome to episode 35 of Takeaways. My name is Patrick Searcy. I'm Director of Marketing for ALN Apartment Data, and I'm joined by the actual star of the show here, our Senior Market Analyst, Jordan Brooks. Jordan, how are you today?
I am great, Patrick. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I heard really good things about your panel at NAA. I'm glad it all seemed to have gone well. Looking forward to seeing you back in Dallas whenever that may happen. I think it's happening later on this year, but we'll touch more on your upcoming events later.
Yep.
But right now, we're talking about the article from the June 2023 newsletter. It's called Examining Price Class Differences as Low Demand Persists. So I noticed that you spent more time on the absorption data than the occupancy data. So tell me a little bit about what you saw regarding occupancy that didn't make it into the article.
I did focus more on the absorption. I think, just demand is of course what is driving all the rest of the performance metrics. And so that's kind of where the meat of that section of the article was spent. But the occupancy data, I think in particular, one interesting aspect is sort of the dichotomy between the overall average occupancy nationally by price class and those same averages, but just looking at properties that entered the year already stabilized. And not to get us too far off track here, but just briefly how ALN assigns price class. We basically take a property's percentile rank in its market according to its average effective rent per square foot, and that's weighted across the unit mix of a property. And that's how we sort of assign A, B, C, D. And so occasionally, usually new supply is going to come in as a class A. Sometimes though, you do get it as a class B. Generally that's if it's in a more outlying submarket or something like that. But class A obviously is the subset that's dealing with the bulk of new supply. And as I mentioned in this newsletter, and as we've covered in other content, one of our other recent newsletters, and I think a blog post or two, this year is going to be historic in terms of multifamily deliveries. And so if you look at just the overall class A average occupancy, it's quite low, and it's lower than would be typical for this time of the year. If you look back at the last 5 or 6 Mays in recent years, this is the lowest average occupancy for class A in that 5-6 year time period. So, but if you look again at properties that entered the year already stabilized, there we see a class A average occupancy nationally of a little over 93%, which is right in line with sort of the longer term average for stabilized class A at this time of year. So, what we're really seeing in the occupancy data is the effect of that new supply. And it's not something where, again, if you look at that top line class A occupancy, you think, oh, wow, that's a really low occupancy. But the stabilized A's are actually doing pretty well. That really, to me, the more concerning aspect is what we're seeing in the workforce housing segments, the class C and the class D. There we're seeing also lower average occupancies than would be typical for this time of year. But there it's not because of a flood of new units, obviously, as with class A, it's negative net absorption. And so that's, one thing I think that's worth pointing out is just the stabilized averages versus the overall averages.
You touched on student loan payments as one challenge for the back half of the year. Elaborate on that for us, if you would, and then tell us some of the other factors that you're watching as we get into this second half of the year.
Well, in terms of factors to watch, I think the big ones are, obviously employment, inflation, and Fed policy around inflation, and then student loan payments and sort of multifamily seasonality. So just to go through some of that briefly, the tight labor market has contributed to inflation by driving up wages and by, providing some consumer demand because people have paychecks coming in, but it has also allowed us to kind of walk this tightrope that we've walked so far economically, and certainly from a multifamily perspective of, consumers absorbing the inflation that we've seen, especially the rent growth that we've seen in the last few years. Now, obviously, we've seen a chunk taken out of demand, again, especially with multifamily, but we haven't seen a cratering in terms of huge negative rent growth and things like that. So what has helped allow that to happen is the tight labor market. We've seen household cash balances declining. We've seen credit card utilization increasing, and that's all manageable as long as people still have jobs, obviously. So where that ties in with inflation and Fed policy is the Federal Reserve has been trying to cool the labor market to cool inflation. We've seen in recent months inflation really start to decline notably. The latest data we're down under 5% year over year, and it's important to note that's a 5% growth from 12 months ago, and 12 months ago we were 8% higher than the 12 months before that. So this is a compounding number. It's not like inflation is no longer an issue, but I think we'll continue to see that decline because part of really the predominant feature of inflation now is housing, and the government data as it relates to that is always pretty significantly behind the current month. So I think we'll continue to see improvement there. We saw in the Fed meeting that just happened, they decided to pause the rate hikes for the time being. So that's all positive. And then when we get to the student loans, though, student loans have been basically paused, and you can pay them if you'd like to, but you're not required to pay them. And that pause has been for more than 3 years now, since the earliest days of COVID. And according to some of the information I've seen from places like the Federal Reserve, so the average student loan balance for people that have a balance is somewhere in terms of a monthly payment, it's somewhere between $200 and $300 per month. And so if you look at the rent growth we've seen in that same period nationally, average effective rents have gone up by about $340 a month since February of 2020. So when we talk about how residents have been able to absorb that rent growth and absorb the inflation in other parts of the economy, the student loan aspect is a big part of that, certainly for a subset of renters. And so I think we're still going to have to wait and see how that shakes out. Payments are expected to restart in September, and that's going to coincide with the last metric I mentioned, which is seasonality in the industry. So one of the sort of hallmark developments of 2023 for our industry has been, it seems like sort of more normal seasonality is returning, which means strong middle quarters, weaker first and fourth quarters. And so when these student loan payments restart in September, those first few months, September, October, November, are going to be coinciding with the time of year when we generally would see apartment demand softening anyway. And so it kind of remains to be seen how all that's going to shake out relative to what we know what we know for certain, which is we're going to see a ton of new supply, and that's going to be continuing in the back half of the year as well. So those are some of the things that we're keeping an eye on.
There's a lot going on out there, isn't there? And it seems like every day there's another article out there that you're reading and I'm reading that we share with each other. It's always something going on. I mentioned it briefly at the beginning of this conversation that you might come back to Dallas. I think that's a little bit later on, maybe I think in August or so. But what else do you have coming up? Summer months, maybe you'll get a little bit of a break?
A little bit of a break, yes. I've got a couple of events coming up here that I think will probably be done before this video actually goes out next week. So for viewers of this, my next event will be July 18th, actually. So a bit of a break for sure. But that's going to be the Multifamily Mindset podcast, and that is going to be virtual. So be on the lookout on our social media for information regarding that. And then in terms of August, I'll be speaking at the Coastal Georgia Apartment Association, August 10th, and the Bay Area Apartment Association Education Expo, August 23rd. And then, yes, I will be back in Dallas for the Apartment Association of Greater Dallas State of the Industry, but that won't be until mid-September.
September. I knew it was somewhere around there. My apologies to Apartment Association of Greater Dallas. Yes, that is coming up in September. Well, do keep an eye on our social media for the actual dates of these that I'm not remembering very well apparently today. You can follow us on Twitter at ALN APT Data. You can just search for ALN Apartment Data on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And right about now, you can click that like and subscribe button. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so that you're always notified of our newest content that we put out. Jordan, thanks again for this month, for talking with us about your article. It was great information. I really appreciate it and look forward to talking with you soon.
You too, Patrick. See you soon.